Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're doing our annual Richmond wrap-up. This is something that SALT, Social Action Linking Together, has taken great pride in doing. Usually we do it in studio with our legislators, but everything has gone virtual since the pandemic, so our wrap-up is also virtual. Joining us tonight is Delegate Rip Sullivan and Delegate Kory. Welcome, Delegate Sullivan and Delegate Kory.
Thank you.
It's great to see you both. It's been kind of a wild time. I want our viewers to really get their arms around exactly what it has meant to, first of all, Democrats are in charge, sort of in charge, thinly in charge in the Senate. It went from a gnat's whisker to a razor thin, quite regrettably, because Ben Chafin, the senator, passed away from COVID, and it was a sitting legislator here in Virginia that passed away from COVID, which is very sad, and that was in the Senate, and so that, you know, a little bit, not a whole lot, because it's so razor thin in the Senate. In the House, you've got a little bit more of a majority, and we do have a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor and attorney general. So since that the stars and the planets aligned, the 25 years of pent-up legislation, the 25 years of addressing issues around vulnerable families, for instance, or criminal justice reform, for instance, have, you know, been working their way through the system. But then the pandemic hit, and everything was upside down. So last year at the end of session, everything shut down, and then there was a veto session, and then there was a very long special session at the end of last year, like through the summer, through the fall. And then the session started again this year. And because it was so short, originally only 30 days, the House was limited to 7 bills apiece. So each of you could only bring 7 bills. So I will start with you, Delegate Kory, to talk a little bit about, you know, what it was like to try to put your arms around all of this that's happened in the last 2 years, actually, and what you think was sort of a highlight of getting through this session, and what you think we can keep, if there's something worth keeping when we kind of go back to normal.
Thank you, Catherine. There are quite a few questions in that one question. First of all, I would like to say that I am so proud that we were successful with our virtual experiment. Really, it was an experiment, never happened before. And one of the most wonderful things about it, and all the Democrats in the House have discussed this, is that the whole virtual nature of the session made it so much more available to the public and so much more transparent, literally transparent, actually, because you didn't have to travel to Richmond. All you had to do was to have the link and watch us, and then you could send in comments through email, and all of it was being archived. So if you missed something or are shocked by something somebody said, you can go back and find it, and it's there in perpetuity, which I don't know how many legislators really are happy about that. But in fact, it was literally the most available session that we have ever had, and I am so proud of that. It was also such a different experience that we had so many more things that we had to do sequentially. We couldn't do things simultaneously. So the days, frankly, the Zoom days were longer. But 7 bills turned into a lot of work. And it's a whole different thing. Honestly, this is going to sound silly, but being in the majority, 7 bills meant 7 bills that you thought would pass. And so not 7 bills that you thought would only, you know, get filed and then fade away. And in the past, I've had my favorite bills that I work really, really, really hard on, and then some that I put in hopes that maybe sometime they'll get heard. But this time, all of the bills that I put in were my favorite bills, and I had to discard some of them. So it was really good. I'm so proud of everything we did and accomplished. I think a lot of our legislative accomplishments were overshadowed by COVID. And the list is so long that people get tired of hearing it. So we have to really work at getting the information out to the public so they can understand what has changed and what areas we emphasized and what we're building towards for the next session. And I think that's one of the most important things, Catherine, is that this is a building process.
Yes.
None of the things that we worked on are issues that are only valuable for 1 year or only have one or two pieces to them. You know, voting access, for example, that covers so much, and we made a lot of progress, but there's still so many more things that we would like to do. And prison reform, criminal justice reform, that's huge.
You've worked really hard. You've worked really hard on that. And I do want to circle back around to what you've done this session that has built on things you have done previously, because the work is never really done when it comes to figuring out how to make prisons a place of rehabilitation and a launch pad for reentry, and to make sure people are treated humanely and given adequate care. And that work is not going to end anytime soon. So I do want to circle back around to that, one of my favorite topics too. I want to ask Delegate Sullivan sort of what your, Delegate Kory has been in the House since 2010. You've been in the House since 2014. So both of you, have been there for some cycles. What about this session, Delegate Sullivan?
Catherine, I've sort of run out of adjectives to describe it. Remarkable, transformative, historic. And I know I speak for Kaye when I say we're enormously proud of what we've accomplished. The prior session, the 2020 session, which now, of course, feels like 5 years ago because of the intervening pandemic. But when you take a look at what we have done in those two sessions, which, by the way, are not 2 years, it's just 16 months ago that we actually took the majority.
Yes.
And I ask people to remember back, think back 16 months ago, the kinds of accomplishments we've had over the course of the last two sessions of the Virginia General Assembly were just unthinkable, unimaginable. We talked about them all the time, but frankly, didn't have the votes. And when you think about the progress we've made in those 16 months, it's frankly breathtaking. Most recently, I know our focus tonight is the session just completed. We abolished the death penalty in Virginia. If you'd asked me or any of my colleagues just 16 months ago, before we had the majority, whether we had any prayer of repealing the death penalty in Virginia, I would have had to candidly tell you no. But here we are now in March of 2021. Virginia, the governor, I don't think he's signed it yet, but he's going to. First Southern state to do this. The state that has used the death penalty the most in the history of the United States. Just a sea change when it comes to that one particular bill, for me at least, represents sort of the sea change that we've had in Virginia in terms of criminal justice reform in Virginia. One issue that is near and dear to my heart that I've been working on since I got to Richmond has to do with climate change and moving us towards more renewables in Virginia. For years and years and years, I toiled in the minority, making progress every now and again. But again, just 16 months ago, Virginia was headed in that direction with respect to climate change, and now we are headed in that direction. And we're no longer talking about whether we should take all these bold actions on climate, but we're talking about how fast to do it and how we're going to do it and when are we going to do it. And Virginia is now recognized as a leader in the country when it comes to clean energy production and setting ourselves on the right path to getting to 100% clean energy. This last session, we layered on top of this of what we'd done in the 2020 session when we passed a number of important bills, the the Reggie bill, the Solar Freedom bill, and I patroned the Clean Economy Act. This year, we changed our focus and we were talking about the transportation sector, and we made, again, sort of historic gains in Virginia on launching us toward an electrified transportation sector. It's the transportation sector that puts the most greenhouse gases into the air in Virginia. And we, again, unthinkable that we could have done this 16 months ago. We are now have set Virginia on a course of working towards more and more electric vehicles on our roads, consistent, of course, with what the manufacturers are doing. It was a little bit of kismet during the session when I was actually about to take to the floor of the General Assembly to talk about, in this case, I guess it was Delegate Bagby's bill relating to the electrification, electric vehicles in Virginia. Just the day before, GM had announced that by 2035, it was going to reconfigure its entire fleet of cars worldwide and build and produce nothing but electric vehicles by 2035. So this is coming. The industry sees that it's coming, and Virginia, rather than lag behind and sort of be dragged into it, is now taking the lead as one of the few states in the country that has done what Virginia has done. So sort of the whiplash of the last 16 months is really remarkable when you sit and remember where we were just 16 short months ago.
Yeah.
So that's how I look back on this session.
Well, you're absolutely right. When I say 2 years, I'm thinking of the 2020 session, the 2021, 2 years, but really it's not 2 years. It's just sessions in different years. So you're right. 16 months is accurate. And I share your pride in the fact that Virginia has abolished the death penalty, the first Southern state to do so. I sort of feel like what happened in Georgia, in turn, and it was because Virginia led the way. Literally, we showed that Southern states can do this. And I feel like we're the gateway to the South at this point. It's like, yes, just look at Virginia. We're the bellwether. The rest of you all can do this.
Well, I will tell you, and I know Kaye wants to say something, but I will tell you, I get calls from legislators around the country.
Yes.
With sort of that sound in their voice. They literally say, well, if you can do that in Virginia, we ought to be able to do it here. They're talking, whether they're talking about climate or death penalty. We are, Virginia's been a leader for years and years and years, in many ways since its very inception, not always in good ways, by the way. But Virginia, what I look back on the last couple of sessions with the most pride is that Virginia, in lots and lots of now positive, good ways, is leading the country, and not just the South, but leading the entire country. And that's where we should be. That's where we should be. And
I think with the election of President Biden, too, we're suddenly talking about direct assistance to families. We're talking about, what about a basic universal income, which Andrew Yang tried to put, and people were like, that's so ridiculous. And then COVID hit, and then stimulus payments directly to people, and then, pilot projects like in Stockton, California, where giving people $500 a month shows that investment in families actually makes them more successful, more independent, and more self-sufficient. We're talking about child care tax credits that can cut child poverty in half. Suddenly, kind of all of these, I really feel like it's the alignment of the stars and the moon. And to get very woo-woo on you guys, it's like Virginia just happened to hit this spot, and then the nation followed. And then other states seem to be following, like Georgia. And it makes me very optimistic that we can get back to a full-throated, for instance, support of unions, which President Biden has made. Unions built the middle class in this country. Why can't we talk about that in Virginia? And paid leave, paid family leave, making sure that everybody can afford higher education. And the thing about transportation, too, is that so many people without adequate public transportation, you can't do anything in the Commonwealth of Virginia in a lot of communities. And so transportation for services, even getting to food pantries, getting to the vaccine. I mean, the pandemic has only revealed the disparities that were always there. Now everybody can see the disparities that were always there. But let's talk about TANF a little bit too, because, there were some strides made. It was increased, I think, last year 10% and this year 15%. you know, is there a possibility that at some point we're going to take this federal block grant and get it to 50, get it to 50% of the poverty level? Is that at this juncture realistic in our conversations? Delegate Kory, you want to take that?
Yes. But first I want to say something about Georgia.
Yeah.
There's a federal, a law that was just filed in Congress called the Momnibus Act, and it's being supported by a number of groups, anti-poverty and grassroots groups in Georgia. And they have been in touch with me to talk about all of the achievements that Virginia has, and can we work with them in organizing and working on the Momnibus Act, which is all about women's health care. And you probably know that I chair a caucus and have for 10 years focusing on women's health care. So they also are developing a unified program across 7 southern states called South Strong. And again, they want Virginia to teach the rest of them how to get all these things done. So
you're kind of the cool. You're the cool kids on the block now. It's kind of like, look at us, we are the cool kids. Everybody wants to know who we are.
But I did want to say something about the poverty. You know, Rip mentioned the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which he worked so hard on last year, and is truly landmark legislation. And part of it had to do with a program called PIP, which is Personal Income Payment Plan. It's a way to assist low-income families with their utility bills. And it starts at 100, the cutoff is 150% of poverty. And through that window, there will be thousands of families in Virginia that will only have to pay a percentage of their annual income for their electric utility bills. And that was in the bill that Rip pushed, but it was supposed to be developed by the SEC, and the SEC in December said, oh dear, we don't know how to do this. Come on, legislature, tell us how to do it. So this whole effort that I put in this past session was to come to an agreement between the utilities and the SEC and the legislature and the advocacy group on how this program would be implemented and when. And we did it. It's extremely exciting. And that is going to make such a huge difference. I know that's not TANF, but that is still helping people in poverty. Rip wants to
let me interrupt here, Catherine, because Kaye is being way too modest.
Okay.
The PIP program, she's right. The PIP program was included in the Clean Economy Act. But when the SEC issued a ruling at the end of last year, literally weeks before we were getting ready to go into session, essentially saying we can't implement this because we need more details. We sort of looked around and said, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And more importantly, who's going to do this? And Kaye stepped into the breach and took charge of making sure that this got through the General Assembly this year so that there would be no delay in its implementation if we had to wait, for instance, until next session. And did just yeoman's work, a Herculean task in a short session conducted remotely to get the PIP program sort of finalized and put together and through. And it's not an uncontroversial program. So I just wanted to take this opportunity publicly to thank Kaye for taking the leadership on that and to congratulate her on a job well done, because she's exactly right. One of the things we worry a lot about when it comes to this new world, this new clean, green world, is how we're going to pay for it, who's going to pay for it, what's the effect on the rate payer. And we know that even without all this, there are too many Virginians struggling to pay their utility bills, and the PIP program is going to go a long way toward helping those people. And I just wanted to thank and congratulate Kaye for doing a spectacular job.
But again, Virginia is a leader. There's only one other state that has this program. So see, there we go, patting ourselves on the back for what the Democratic majority has been able to accomplish. And building on success, the may I just mention, this is not about energy, but the Humane Cosmetics Act, which I am so proud of, banning any cosmetics that have been produced by with animal testing. And that we are the fourth in the country to do this. And I put this bill in 2016. And as you can imagine, it didn't get very far. But you prompted me to remember this bill earlier, Catherine, when you said how, oh no, Rip did, because Rip talked about how the industry was coming to the point where the electric infrastructure and emphasis on electrifying our transportation was going to fit with their plan. And that's what happened with the Humane Cosmetics bill, because the Personal Products Council, which is of 500 different manufacturers, actually supported my bill. And they said, basically, they didn't say it in public, but they said to me, this is what is coming. And we need to be with it. The European Union has already done this. And of course it makes sense. I mean, you can't retool for non-cruelty and then cruelty produced drug cosmetics. That's ridiculous. So it was good timing, and I am just so happy that it was implemented. And you know what? People magazine wanted to talk about it.
I think that's fantastic. You know, you point out something, you both are really kind of talking about how sometimes you work on bills and you work on bills, but what needs to change is the context. Like the world needs to catch up, or an industry needs to catch up for the thing that you've been saying is the thing we need to be doing, because it makes sense to do it. And so there's a lot of context that changed. Again, COVID revealed many things. You know, there was legislation about preventing evictions that was necessary. I mean, we've always had vulnerable families, but suddenly the fact that, for instance, Richmond had the highest eviction rate of like any city in the country became problematic when you've got people with COVID and it becomes a public health crisis. And so along with keeping people in their homes and keeping the lights on, you know, and having to craft legislation that actually protects people, you know, in other words, legislation that punishes landlords for, in effect, going around the court system to evict by changing the locks or turning off the utilities, things like that. I mean, you had to the legislature had to catch up with where people were in the moment we were in order to meet this crisis where all of us were. And I think in the main, it was a wonderful session from what I could see, reminding people that you're a part-time legislature, like you do this. Right, I know. Rip is laughing.
Our constituents don't see it that way, and it's full-time work, that's for sure.
You're right.
Let me a couple things on that point, Catherine. You know, you're right. A lot of work over the course of the last 16 months on keeping people in their homes. But another thing we've done, which frankly hasn't gotten the publicity that it deserves, is a more long-term housing goal, problem, which is to say, we've known for many years in Virginia that our housing stock, our stock of affordable housing, all around the Commonwealth, not just here in Northern Virginia, but all around the Commonwealth, is woefully short. We've done a couple things, I think, that are also very dramatic recently and in this last session, one of which is a huge infusion of money into the Housing Trust Fund, which had sort of bumped along for years when it was first created. Now, I think 5 or 6 years ago, it's sort of like the $5 million range. This budget has $125 million in it for the Housing Trust Fund. And even more important, I think, for the future of affordable housing in Virginia is, for the first time, Virginia has now adopted a low-income housing tax credit modeled on the federal tax credit, which is going to go a long way towards enabling developers, both profit and nonprofit developers, to be able to build more affordable housing all around the Commonwealth. Because if people don't have a place to live, every problem that you can imagine flows from that problem. So that's one of the things I'm particularly proud of. Let me also take a moment to say, Kaye mentioned this briefly, but while we're patting ourselves on the back, Catherine, you talked about what the pandemic cast a light on We all know what happened when it came to voting during the pandemic. What I spend a lot of time reminding people is we passed early voting in Virginia. No excuse early voting in Virginia, 45 days before the election starts. Last session before anyone had ever heard of COVID. All right. This was not in response to COVID. This was something that we'd been working on for years and years and years, trying to make it easier to vote rather than harder to vote.
Right.
We passed that bill before anyone had ever heard of COVID. It was almost like, we knew it was coming, but it was enormously helpful in making sure that people could safely vote. And what are we now seeing around the country? We're seeing state legislature after state legislature. I think of Georgia. I think of Arizona. I think it's Iowa, or maybe it's Nebraska.
Iowa. Yep.
Reining all this stuff back. This is not a partisan show, I know that, but Republican legislatures now
Georgia
moving in the other direction, trying to make it harder for people to vote. And one of the things this election this year is going to be about is, do we want to go back to make it harder to vote in Virginia? Because frankly, if this election doesn't go well, that will happen. If you think that won't happen, just take a look at Georgia and Iowa and Arizona and other states that are already looking at making it harder to vote. So Virginia was way ahead of the curve on those issues. We this last session codified several of the other things that the governor did do in specific response to the pandemic, like drop boxes. We've now allowed localities to be open on Sundays to vote. And we need to make it easier to vote in Virginia, and we've accomplished that, and we need to make sure we keep that.
So this is a good moment to remind people this is an election year in the House of Delegates, as well as for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. And it is important to vote your values, because these things are happening in Virginia because we voted Democrats into our statewide offices, and we voted a majority of Democrats in the Senate and the House. And I am not bashful at all in reminding people, putting families first, putting communities first. The economy depends on everybody thriving, people having affordable housing and good jobs and good wages and decent education and childcare for their children, all of which were supremely tested during COVID, when parents were stuck at home and their kids were not in school and daycare centers shut down. And so we're going to break, but I hope people will join us in the second half. We have a lot more to talk about.
The COVID-19 vaccines can be our chance to get back to our plans, to get back to each other, to life. But it's okay to have questions, like, can the vaccines give you COVID-19? You cannot get COVID-19 from a vaccine. Find the latest information at getvaccineanswers.org.
America, land of the free. It's at the core of who we are. Freedom. The freedom to live without fear, to drive through all 50 states, to sleep safely in our own beds, the freedom to jog where we please, to watch birds in the park, to wear a hoodie, the freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because no matter your religion, gender, disability, age, race, all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Maria, so how's work?
It was fourth period biology. Our students just weren't getting how easily viruses spread. So Miss Bella and I had them role play a zombie virus outbreak. By the time they had all learned the lesson, all the living were dead. Hey, how's your job going?
That big sales meeting I planned? Next year, I might get to go.
Cool.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. Let's wear face masks in public, stay 6 feet or more from others, follow state and local guidelines, and wash our hands frequently. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Tonight we're doing our annual SALT Richmond wrap-up, social action linking together, led by John Horsch, who's been doing advocacy work since 1983 on issues regarding the most vulnerable families in Virginia, criminal justice reform, prison reform. John is the one who has orchestrated this for many years. And while we normally do this in person, like everything else this year, in the year of the pandemic, we're doing it virtually. Joining me is Delegate Kory and Delegate Rip Sullivan. So I want to ask the two of you, as far as in the last 16 months, there's been 2 sessions where Democrats have been in charge, both the House and the Senate. But in the House, if you can talk a little bit about how restructuring committees, who ended up being chairs of committees, the way the majorities are situated on the committees, and what this has meant for civic engagement for advocates who are trying to do issue education on some of these bills, some of these issues. I'll start with you, Delegate Kory. Talk a little bit about, what's it meant structurally to have Democrats reorganize the House?
Chair Kory.
Yes,
Chair Kory.
You have to call me Chair Kory, right?
Chair Kory.
The first chairman of cities, counties, and towns in maybe ever, at least in 25 years. And that leads me to something that I wanted to talk about, Catherine, and that is how many women now are in positions of leadership. It's astonishing, and it's a little, I get more emotional about it. I shouldn't. But on the first day of session, sitting in my virtual seat, looking up on the dais and seeing a woman speaker, and in the Senate, a woman president, and the majority leader, a woman also, and not just white women in charge, but Black women too. And it's just unprecedented. And the committee chairs are from all over the state. They were chosen because they're wonderful and experienced and terrific, like me. But seriously, it was an extremely careful effort to represent all of Virginia, instead of just the most democratic part, like Northern Virginia. And we changed the name of the labor. See, now I'm so used to it, I say it the new way. It used to be Commerce and Labor, but now it's Labor and Commerce. That's just an indication of what our values are. And the people who were in positions of running the subcommittees are also from all over and had a lot of responsibility. The committee structure was not really different, in the sense that we have the same committees and roughly the same number of subcommittees. But the way we met and the way that we allowed and encouraged public input and gave notice way ahead of time, a number of days ahead of time, all of that was new. All of that was major effort to allow and encourage the public to participate. And I think it was very successful. People frequently were lined up to speak in the Zoom meeting that they couldn't really talk for more than a few seconds, but it was invigorating. It was also, and I know Rip is going to agree with me, it was also very interesting to get to actually see the people who were speaking. If you're in a committee and someone is speaking, testifying, you're not that close to them. You can't really see their faces and their expressions and hear their passion the same way that you can when it's a video, a Zoom. And I appreciated that a great deal.
Do you think some of that too was because people were in their own home and were not standing in a big, huge room in front of a microphone with total strangers staring at them? You know, how much more did that? Yeah, that their advocacy.
Intimidating.
I've had people tell me that now they don't have to care what their bottom half looks like. They don't have to care what the back of their head looks like. They just have to know what they want to say and be ready to do that. And yeah, I think that made a big difference. I think it made us seem much more like real people as well. And that's important. We all want to be approachable.
That's a wonderful unintended consequence.
Yeah. Yeah. Kathy, let me just take a couple moments to pile on to some of Kaye's comments. You know, it was very important to the leadership of the House, Speaker, the Majority Leader, me. I'm sort of chromosomally challenged these days, but to make sure that the leadership of the House writ large, not just Speaker, Majority Leader, Caucus Chair, but committee chairs, were geographically diverse, were diverse by, whether it's gender, ethnicity, whatever it is. And if you look at who our committee chairs are, it is not just Northern Virginia. The chair of one of the most powerful committees in the General Assembly, the Labor and Commerce Committee, is Jawan Ward. A black woman from out in the Newport News area. I'm honored to be her vice chair on that committee. Dolores McGuinn from Richmond, a black woman from Richmond, the very powerful Transportation Committee. So it was really, really important to us that when we took control and we're developing our committee structure, that the committee structure reflect our caucus and, more importantly, reflect Virginia. We are enormously proud of the men and women who are leading our committees, because they're all doing just a remarkable job.
Can I ask you a question about subcommittees? Because there's a lot of advocates. I work with a lot of advocates here in Northern Virginia who will get their kids up and, drive down to Richmond for a 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m. subcommittee meeting, only to be told there's not enough time for them to testify. That actually happened. Sure. So are these subcommittees, I'm assuming there are subcommittees in the House, really coming to the table in good faith? That's, not just to set up committees so that you can either put bills aside, which has happened in the past, or structure it so that it makes it almost impossible for people to come down and actually speak. Because in the previous life before the Democrats were in charge, that happened. It happened. And so I think people want to understand that there is a good faith effort to engage the public and advocacy groups in being partners in good legislation.
Yes, I agree with you. And we no longer set up subcommittees expressly designed to kill liberal bills. Well, to kill a bill. I've been a member of killing subcommittees a lot in the time I've been in the General Assembly. We don't do that anymore. We have subcommittees that are serious, are subject related, and work extremely hard. And we advertise the time and the agenda as best we can ahead of time, so that all the advocates have access to the subcommittee. And then they also are able to follow the subcommittee's decisions as they go to the main committee. And each step of the way makes such a difference. And then, of course, if a bill gets to the floor, that also is available for the public to view and to trace the progress of a bill. So often I am asked by a constituent or an advocate, why did you vote against that bill in subcommittee, and then in committee you voted for it, and then on the floor you voted against it. Well, it's because the bills change as they progress, and that's very hard to explain. But I think this year we made some progress in demonstrating that process, in showing how legislation actually is formed and how it's not all about the vote. You have to understand the whole process.
Yeah, Catherine, I would tell you that the notion that subcommittees are unimportant to the process or just designed to kill things is frankly, at least under our control, sort of backwards. It's in the subcommittees that the real work gets done, which is not to say that a committee meeting, there's not a lot of back and forth, but subcommittees are more focused as to topic area. And we spend a lot of time in every subcommittee meeting really chewing on these bills. I will admit, and I'm sure Kaye would acknowledge this as well, that it is sometimes frustrating when we're only able to allow members of the public to speak for short periods of time. And we have to walk this sort of razor's edge. We don't want to cut anyone, we don't want to tell anyone they can't speak. But if we've got 30 people in the queue, you're left with very little option other than to keep people relatively short because we are limited, we are time limited. A lot of people, when they think of committee meetings, they think of what they see in Congress with hours and hours and testimony that lasts, people are sitting at a table and they give an hour's worth of testimony and back and forth answers and questions. That's not how the Virginia General Assembly works. And so we do oftentimes have to keep people really, really brief, and more brief than we otherwise might like. But we want people to know that they're going to get a chance to be heard. And if we invite them virtually or in real life to come down, we want to give them that opportunity to be heard, and we work really hard to make sure they have that opportunity.
This is a great opportunity to refresh people about civics, which I think everybody had in 8th grade and promptly forgot. And the thing about inviting people in and helping them to understand the process, the more people understand the process, the better they get at it. The more they really are a collaborator in creating good bills, informed bills, and educating legislators about issues they're passionate about and very deeply knowledgeable about. I remember when James Parrish one time was in a huge room at a committee hearing or subcommittee hearing, and they were asking people to keep it brief, and James just walked up there, made his statement, and said, "Would everybody who agrees please stand up?" And a huge number of people stood up. It's kind of like enough said. Like, all these people don't need to speak because they all just stood up and basically showed you they're here to support what I just said. And to me, that was such a great maneuver, but it benefited everybody. It was a powerful visual for the legislators sitting on the dais, and it kind of cut down everybody standing up to say the same thing. So I hope that people will kind of, in the spirit of seeing themselves as co-collaborators in their own democracy, co-collaborators with their own government, will step up and be braver in this new world of possibly, if we retain this ability to testify virtually in the next session, that would just, to me, be such a great asset to good government.
Yeah, I agree. I make a point of listening, and I'm sorry I cut you off, Rip, and I won't speak very long. I honestly want to hear from every person, every advocate, every constituent who is interested and has an opinion on the bill. I mean, we are representatives. We're not experts in every single field. My God, how could we be? Look at all the different issues we have to tackle. And so that listening and molding and changing a bill is part of the process. And when we're able to have so much participation, that allows us to end up with a product that benefits so many people instead of something that we're just imposing out of a party platform.
So let me just pivot real quickly, because I know that John Horsch, who is our coordinator and collaborator and creator of this wrap up, really is interested in talking about what has happened with prison reform and some of the strides made, and especially around solitary confinement, trying to eliminate it ultimately. But just again, that's one of those bills that where you seem to chip away at it every year. You make a little incremental progress. The last one was a study of the use of solitary confinement, which came back and it had been used over 7,000 times. So in some cases, for periods of time that put it in the category of torture is defined by international convention. So Delegate Kory, talk a little bit, because I know prisons are your passion, and you've certainly over the many sessions introduced many bills that have tried to make prisons a point of reentry, a point of rehabilitation, a humane place where people's basic needs are met.
Yes, no, you're right. And I do want to give John and SALT a lot of credit for making prison reform their passion also, and constantly staying in touch with the legislators whom they know share their passion on these issues. And John brought to me a couple of years ago information about video visitation for incarcerated people, to how they could have video visits with their families, and in other ways it would be pretty impossible. Other times it'd be pretty impossible to have a face-to-face. And that led me to understand a lot more about the whole visitation process and how regulated it is, and how the visitation process is actually, I think, very discriminatory, because you have to reserve your visit online, and you're only allowed to visit once a month. Now, how many people does that exclude? Whereas if we now have video visitation and expand it, as John has pushed and taught me, that will make such a big difference. And again, this is all small building blocks. Right now, I was so happy that the budget amendment about video visitation was accepted, and that can build on the efforts that so many dedicated volunteers have already made. It's still a small program, but we're going to prove what a difference it makes to be able to interact with your family on a regular basis, and how that makes reentry so much smoother and allows the released incarcerated people to be much more quickly adapted and enfolded into their communities.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the first things I learned when I got to Richmond, Catherine, and this has not changed now that we're in the majority, is that good ideas often take more than one session, sometimes several sessions, sometimes a lot of sessions, to sort of percolate and get to the point where we can pass them. And the solitary confinement bill was frustrating this year. It got out of the Senate rather handily, and I hasten to add it attracted votes from both sides of the aisle, as it did when it got into committee in the House. Someone asked earlier, what's changed in terms of the committees, and what's changed when the Democrats took control. It's been very interesting to watch the Republican side of the aisle, some of whom now feel a little more free to vote. I'll just say vote their conscience, vote to not vote in block. And this bill, which was Senator Morrissey's bill, attracted several, I can't remember exactly how many, but several Republican votes. So this is an idea that's not just a Democratic idea, certainly not any longer. But as you know, Catherine, it bumped up against the budget and some claims that this was going to cost too much money. And that's sort of the next frontiers. We've got to plan for next session already. It's now March. We're already Kaye and I are already thinking about next session, and advocates like SALT should already be thinking about next session, because if you wait until a session starts, Too late.
Too late.
Too late. So now we need to be talking about how we're going to show people and make the argument that this is not something that's going to cost too much money. This may in fact save us money. I mean, you hate to argue about these kinds of things because of dollars, because it's just the right thing to do. But having said that, we do have budgets and we do have to pay for things. And this bill sort of foundered on the shoals of, gee, this looks like it's going to be expensive. And that we need to start now making clear that it's not, and that regardless of what it costs, it's worth doing.
So Senator Howell did indicate that they did, there was a $40 million, I think, fiscal impact, and she was saying that
big number.
We're not considering savings in that. We're considering mental health costs, and apparently, there are people incarcerated who have mental health problems, and that's one of the reasons that they're incarcerated. And that's one of the reasons we should never really let go or lose sight of why prison reform matters. We have an enormous number of people incarcerated all over the country, but certainly in Virginia, we have huge numbers of people who are incarcerated. Many of them have mental health issues. We need to get them prepared to re-enter the community. And we should be working very hard to make sure that they, get the COVID vaccine and they get medical care and they get mental health care. I think one of the bills that passed was Pell Grants too, because there are people incarcerated who want an education, so they have skills when they get out. And so even though we've eliminated the death penalty, which is amazing, what that also has meant is that lots more people are getting life without parole. And that's something down the road that Virginia is going to have to grapple with. Some of these really bigger issues. It's never, to my mind, going to be one and done. It's always going to be tweaking. And we only have one. We only have one private prison too, a privately operated prison, and that's Lawrenceville. And there's some problems with having a private prison that is publicly traded and profit driven, overseeing the management of a prison. So perhaps one of the two of you would like to address what some of the problems are with that.
I would like to start and then turn it over to Rip, because then he'll do a much more polished presentation and finish it off. But the private prison issue is something that I spent a lot of time working on in preparation for this session. And a lot of the information and work was done with SALT, as well as with Jen Carter's organization, Humanization Organization. There are a significant number of advocacy groups who are involved in all the details of the way that we handle our prisons and incarcerated persons. And I have been for years focusing on women's health care. And last year I was able to get a bill passed that dealt with incarcerated women who are pregnant, how they give birth, how that is handled, how they are allowed to stay with their infants for bonding purposes, and changing the visitation limits for toddlers and infants to an incarcerated parent. The statistics of life failure rather than success for children who have an incarcerated parent nationally are just abysmal and astonishing. So I was pleased about that, but I want to give SALT credit for pursuing this private prison issue and working with me and a lot of others to come up with some legislation about it. Unfortunately, that was one of the issues that we did not get to this time. You can't do everything in one fell swoop. So now we have the opportunity to refine our approach. Instead of simply saying we ban private prisons, we can be more specific. Don't you agree, Delegate Sullivan?
It's the only thing Kaye has said wrong tonight, which is that I could do a better job than she did, because I really can't. This is a vexing issue. It's one that, as you suggested, Catherine, we need to keep working on. again, even though we're in the majority, that doesn't mean that one thing they don't issue when you get into the majority is a magic wand. Still, this issue continues to need a little more work. But I can promise you it's going to be back next session. And if we don't get across the goal line, then the next session.
Right.
Although, circling back to something we said earlier about this being an election year, this election this fall is going to be in large measure a referendum on what we have done in the last two sessions of the Virginia General Assembly. Not only what we've done, but as you suggest, Catherine, sort of where we're headed and where we want to go. That will be sort of the issue on which this election cleaves, it seems to me, because there's going to be people running for governor, there's going to be people running for the House of Delegates claiming that what we've done, what we've accomplished over the last 16 months has put Virginia on precisely the wrong course. I'm going to be crisscrossing the Commonwealth, taking the exact opposite position, that what we've accomplished in the last 16 months has finally set Virginia on all sorts of issues on precisely the right course. And we cannot go back because Virginia is now leading the way on criminal justice reform issues. And we've talked about climate and election law. We haven't even mentioned the minimum wage tonight. Look what's happening across the river. We can't get the minimum wage through Congress. So what's happening? The states are doing it in Virginia. Here's another thing you couldn't have imagined 16 months ago. Virginia is raising its minimum wage, right? That will go away, depending on if the election goes the wrong way this fall. So, we haven't done everything we want to do. And I'm with you, Catherine. We couldn't have expected that we would do it all immediately. But my goodness, we've certainly set Virginia in the right direction. And I know I speak for Kaye when I say when we head back next year in the majority, we're going to continue to make progress on all these and other issues that we've been talking about tonight. And I'm with Kaye, by the way. I want to thank SALT before I run out of time for all their great work.
And I want to thank both of you because it is legislators like you who are helping to move Virginia forward. I've lived here all my life, as have my ancestors for 4 centuries before me. I love being proud of Virginia. I love seeing us on lists where we're leading the way on issues. And I do credit the Democratic Party for taking us in the direction that every community in Virginia and the people in every community in Virginia will have an opportunity to thrive and be successful, and to believe that our system of justice applies equally to all people. So I would love to see some women in statewide office, because we're about due for that too, and just keep doing what you do so well. Thank you both so much for being here. That's it for us tonight on Inside Scoop.